Straight to the stage, they love me. I understand they hungry, but please don't hate, that's ugly. I've been sliding, shaking, moving. I've been popping in my city. Shawty say she love the way we do it with me.
Hey guys, it's Julia. Welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be another indie brand spotlight video. So I did my first episode of this series, I want to say like last month, maybe the month before that. I don't know, my upload schedule has been absolute shit. But my first episode of this series was on Odin's Eye, and today I'm talking about Nabla Cosmetics. So I'm really excited. Nabla was probably one of the first like real indie brands I tested out. I don't know if we're really qualifying Juvia's Place as an indie brand anymore, but still, Nabla is one of my favorite brands, and they've become very successful in the past years, but I still feel like they feel like an indie brand at the core, so I thought they would be perfect for the second episode of this series. Also, to honor this series, and also because I have a very big basket of makeup to give away, and I can't see my friends right now for them to come take it, I put together a little indie makeup giveaway for you guys. So link to enter that will be in the description box. It does have Nabla in there, but it also has Odin's Eye, Kaleidos, pretty much just all my favorite indie brands I talk about very often on this channel, as well as some that I haven't. So everything you see on screen is going to be in the giveaway, and you can go ahead and enter that down below. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Unlike the Odin's Eye video, because their brand is a little bit smaller and has a smaller product offering, I was able to pretty much cover every single product that the brand offers, whereas Nabla, they have everything from like foundation to eyeshadow to even brushes, which I'll talk about. So I don't have the entire line, but I will be reviewing everything that I've tried before from their line. For me, Nabla is really a brand that consistently kills it with packaging, formulations as well. They're not just pretty packaging, they make really, really beautiful quality makeup products. And just generally, even if a certain collection's not for me, they always kill it with the creativity. But in the spirit of creativity, I want to take a second to thank the sponsor for today's video, which is Skillshare. Skillshare has been a long-time partner here on my channel, so if you've been with me for a bit, you probably already know. But Skillshare is an online learning community where you can choose through thousands of online classes on just like a plethora of creative skills, as well as like productivity, marketing, pretty much anything you ever want to learn about. I actually teach 2 classes on Skillshare, so thank you guys so much for all the support on the last one that dropped last month. Both of my classes are on beauty content creation. The first is more of the basics, whereas the second is a little bit more about the business side of things, as well as sponsorships and questions about that. But especially during quarantine, I've just found Skillshare to be a really good way to productively spend my time and get entertainment that's also helping me further myself. So for example, my class recommendation of the month is called Money Management for those just getting started with personal finance and investing productivity. It's a bit of a wordy title, but it's really good, especially for people who are like 18 to maybe early 20s. And I guess the title is self-explanatory. It's pretty much just about how to manage money for the first time and how to like start off your adult life on a good foot financially. So for a limited time, you can use the link down in my description box to get a free trial of Skillshare Premium on me. Both of my classes are on Premium, so you can watch my classes for free, as well as my class recommendation of the month or anything else, literally. But thank you as always to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Anyways, I think that's all I have to say. Full details of this look, I'll talk about whatever I'm wearing on my face throughout this video because pretty much most of it's Nabla, but the look should probably be on Instagram as well. Please don't mind my hair. I'm planning on getting a haircut soon. I haven't had my hair touched since February, so it's been looking ratty. Grab a drink. I have Coke Zero in a wine glass. Oh my god, I forgot Dew Fairy. I'm so sorry. Dew Fairy of the day is Africa Gamacina. Thank you so much for having your notification bell on. I'm sorry that I forgot. And without further ado, let's get into Indie Brand Spotlight Episode 2, Nabla. Alright, I have a lot of products to get through today. Some of them are like pretty old and some of them are fairly new releases. Nabla is an Italian brand. I believe they're pretty big in Europe, and they just recently came to Ulta in the United States. So before that, it was pretty hard to get them in the US. You had to buy from Beauty Bay. So I think the first purchase I made from them, which I believe was the Dreamy palette as well as the concealer, took me about a month and a half to get, which was annoying, but I understand that that's what European customers deal with whenever buying makeup from the US, so we have like zero right to complain. Anyways, the only products I don't have physically to show you guys that I will be talking about in this video are the close-up concealer and currently the Soul Blooming palette, but everything else I have and I'll be able to show you guys, as well as any looks I've done with any of the products I'll flash on screen. But Nabla actually has a very, very wide product offering. I feel like most indie brands really tend to focus on eyeshadow palettes or just more color cosmetics, whereas Nabla is a pretty big brand, especially in Europe, but they offer everything from complexion products to eyeshadows, which I personally think is the best thing that they make, but also like lip products. Their product line is extensive, so I think that's awesome. But I guess today I'm going to start with probably my favorite thing that they offer, which are their eyeshadows. My first introduction to Nabla, and I think a lot of other people's, was from the Dreamy palette. This, I remember about 2 years ago, kind of like the Colored Rain Queen of Hearts palette, was one of the most sought after kind of indie brand palettes. I believe I heard about this and the Soul Blooming palette from J. Kissa, so I have her to thank for kind of introducing me to the brand. But I think the packaging was what kind of first drew me in, as well as the color scheme. This really was the type of color scheme that was super popular about 2 years ago, which was neutrals with a pop of purple in there. I still think that this is absolutely beautiful today, and kind of a little bit more in line with what I look for now in eyeshadow palettes, because back then I was like, if it's not a rainbow palette or doesn't have like all vibrant colors, I don't want it. Now this kind of color scheme of neutrals with a few pops of richness is what I really look for. So this was my first introduction to the Nabla eyeshadow formula, and just in general, I would say this is one of my top probably 5 favorite formulas in my collection. Mattes kind of remind me a little bit of the Anastasia Beverly Hills formula, but a little bit less powdery. So both of those formulas are really soft and very pigmented. These are just a little bit more creamy and less like powdery than the Anastasia ones. So I feel like you get the same amount of pigmentation, but because there's not as much powdery kick-up, these are a little bit easier to control and just a tiny bit easier to work with. However, even in these kind of neutral colors, these are incredibly pigmented shadows. And another thing that I've noticed is that the formula is very consistent between other palettes that Nabla does, as well as other size palettes that Nabla does. So the mattes are just an always really, really good formula, whether it's neutrals or colorful shades. This particular palette has some kind of softer shimmers in here as well, which I think that this is probably their better shimmer formula. For example, rose gold. This is just like kind of classic metallic type formula, and I think it performs really well. The only shade in here that I don't like is ironically the kind of shade that drew me into the palette, which was of course Delirium. This I thought was going to be just like a beautiful metallic purple, but it's kind of chunky and it has a bit more of a black base than purple. Either way, I think this looks beautiful if you can kind of get it onto the eyes, but it's a struggle getting there because it's so flaky and kind of crumbly. This is a shade that if you're going to be using it in your eye look, I would recommend doing your eyes first because it's going to create a mess. So that's unfortunate. I still really love this palette though, and I think that this was a really great introduction to their formula. I later on bought the Soul Blooming palette, despite that one getting a few bad reviews. I don't have it with me to show you guys right now, but that one is a little bit more of like a springy toned color scheme, whereas I think this Dreamy palette is a little bit more year-round. Soul Blooming did have another one of those kind of chunkier metallic shades in there that I don't love as much, as well as a few duochrome. So that was kind of my first introduction to Nabla's duochrome shades. If you're wanting kind of like rich neutrals and softer metallics, I would go for Dreamy. If you're wanting a bit more high impact shades, I think that Soul Blooming is still neutral, but it has some more unique shades. And then the only other bigger palette that I've tried from Nabla is the Secret palette. And I wasn't super interested in this color scheme when it came out, but I saw it in person and I was like, that is so pretty. It's kind of interesting in the way it's laid out because I think each row has a different color scheme. So if you cover up each row, it's like a whole different palette. You have the berry tones on the top, kind of cooler tones in the middle, and then just like all neutrals on the bottom. I think this is the best bigger palette to go for if you're wanting to try out all 3 of Nabla's formulas at once, because they have some of the more high impact shimmer shades and duochromes, like this shade here called Play Hard. I think this is beautiful, kind of like a greenish toned white with a greenish toned flip. I think it's beautiful. And there's also some kind of softer metallic shades in here as well that I think just perform absolutely beautifully. This black in here called Nablack, which I think is, it took me like 10 minutes to understand. I was like, why, what's a Nablack? But it's Nabla with a CK at the end. This is one of the best matte blacks I've ever tried in my life. You can see that there's a tiny bit of shimmer running through it. I think that's just to really make it a little bit more creamy, but you don't see any of that shimmer on the eyes. I think it really is just the finest tiny touch of micro glitter. Addiction, which is this beautiful like teal matte shade, kind of gives me Subculture vibes. This particularly is a really hard shade to formulate generally. I would say that this is the bigger palette that I would recommend most, just because I feel like you can do the most out of this one. You can get really vibrant colorful looks as well as some really nice neutral ones, and you get to really experience all of the formulas that Nabla offers, and I think it's all good. Plus the packaging is just beautiful. I think, again, kind of like Odin's Eye, they just really kill it with the small details, and I don't like pretty packaging when it takes away from the quality of the products, but again, I don't feel like they're compromising any of that. So those are their bigger palettes, but then Nabla also offers mini palettes as well. I believe these were one of the first things that hit Ulta. They're called the Cutie Palettes, and they're 6-pan little color schemes. I received the 3 of them that you see here, the Wildberry, the Platinum, and then the Metropolitan. Metropolitan, I believe, is the only one that I left in its original form. I knew I wanted to keep one of them for my personal collection and then put the other 2 in the giveaways, but between the Metropolitan and the Wildberry, I wasn't fully in love with either color scheme. So what I did was I took out the shades that I wanted from the Metropolitan palette, took out the shades I didn't want in the Wild Berry, and then kind of made my own. And then I made my own perfect little cutie palette out of the Wild Berry. So I'm sorry you can't buy this particular color scheme, but this is the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes right now. I'm using this beautiful like kind of mid-tone berry shade here, as well as this kind of darker, more magenta berry tone shade. This gold metallic shade here is what I have all over my eyes. I believe this is available as a single as well. And then I have Blackberry, which looks like a brown, but it's actually kind of like an eggplant, almost like purple berry toned dark shade. I think it's a really unique color. I have that kind of fluffed onto the outer corner. These mini palettes, I think that they have the same formula of mattes as the bigger palettes, but an even better shimmer formulas. I think that's really interesting because a lot of the times mini palettes often have worse formulas than their bigger counterparts, but these are fire. Especially some of these straight up metallics and duochromes. So Alchemy 2.0, which I believe is a potted version of one of their most popular singles, which is Alchemy. This is one of their duochromes. I just think that that is incredible. And then some of these metallics in here honestly kind of remind me of the Pat McGrath metallics. They're just absolutely insane. So this is the gold that I have on my eyes right now. That's just literally metal. Absolutely recommend all of these if you can find a color scheme that you like. If you're like me, I wish that they offered this particular color scheme, or I wish that you could like customize your own cutie palette, but alas. I think this platinum palette is very unique. You don't see this color scheme very often, and the silver in here is like a straight up Pat McGrath metallic. If you're wanting something more neutral, I would go for the Metropolitan, and then if you're wanting something really nice and deep, I would go for the Wild Berry palette. In terms of which formulas I prefer better, I think that the metallic formula in the mini palettes is a lot more unique than the bigger palettes, but I like what the bigger palettes have to offer in terms of color schemes. Nabla also has glitter pans, and they recently came out with the Miami Lights glitter palette, which I wouldn't necessarily call this a palette. It's basically just a quad of 4 really beautiful glitters, but personally for me, I don't go for pressed glitters that often. These are really chunky. So I would say that Nabla's pressed glitters, in terms of the colors that they offer, like this, I don't see pressed glitters like this very often. This is called Scorpio. I think the texture of Nabla's pressed glitters is pretty unique. They're a little bit more chunky, but they definitely look a little bit more unique than just a typical pressed glitter. So this little palette here was their summer release, which I think is kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of pushback against pressed glitters recently, especially because of their environmental effects. So I don't know, it seems like a kind of interesting release, especially because I know Europe is a lot more environmentally like conscious than the United States. So I think that these glitters are really pretty, but again, not really something I would purchase for myself. Next up, 2 products that I bought from Nabla before they were sold at Ulta. So these I believe I both bought on Beauty Bay. The first was the Nabla Close-Up Concealer. That concealer was basically heart-shaped tape. It was clear that they were kind of trying to dupe that with the packaging and then the kind of like shape of the applicator and everything. It was just a big doe-footed applicator and a very full coverage concealer. So it was clear what they were kind of trying to dupe. Unfortunately, I just didn't love how that one sat on the eyes. I felt like it looked okay until I got into natural lighting, and then I was like, wow.
This is disgusting.
Which I feel like Tarte Shape Tape, one of its merits is that I can apply the smallest amount and still get a ton of coverage, so it doesn't look like I'm wearing a ton of concealer because I really didn't layer on that much product. It's just a tiny amount of full coverage product that gave me what I needed, whereas the Nabla one, I just felt like it looked a lot heavier on the under eyes. Not awful, like it wasn't the worst concealer I've ever tried, but it looked like concealer. So that was not my favorite. I did end up decluttering that one fairly recently actually. The other product that I've been actually trying to pan from them is the Nabla Contour in the shade Gotham. This was another J Kisser recommendation. I think it's just a really beautiful contour shade for fairer skin tones. And I actually don't even know if they still sell this. I am having a very hard time getting through this, but it's the contour that I'm wearing on my cheeks, and honestly, even though I do prefer cream contour in like pretty much all situations, I think that this is lovely. I think the formula of Nabla's pressed cheek products like this are really good. And I've heard really good things about their blushes in this formula, in this like kind of pressed pan. So if you are someone who uses singles, I would recommend it. I personally, I don't tend to reach for singles. I reach for like individual cheek products like this. So for me, I would say the single pans get like maybe 7 out of 10, 9 out of 10 for formula, but like 5 out of 10 for the amount that I want to use them. Alright, cheek products. I'll try and keep this somewhat brief because I just reviewed these in the new makeup releases, favorites and fails, and I don't have anything very different to say from what I said in that video. But Nabla's cheek products I've been interested in trying for a long time. So they have the Skin Bronzing line, which are their bronzers, obviously. And then they have the Skin Glazing line. So I think the highlighters are probably more famous, but they do have some pink shades, which are meant to be kind of like metallic shimmery blushes. The thing with these is, I feel like these have very similar formulas, which isn't necessarily what I want. I want different things out of a bronzer and a highlighter. The formula works really well for the bronzer, I think. It's kind of like a stiffer form. That sounds bad, but it's a little bit lighter, very tightly pressed. There's not powdered kick-up or anything. And I think this bronzer is really easy to layer on. It has a little bit of like a soft glow to it, but it's not shimmery or metallic. It doesn't emphasize all your texture. So I think that this is really easy to build up and looks natural while giving you a really nice bronze. So for that reason, I think this looks beautiful in natural lighting. It's one of my favorite like kind of natural makeup look bronzers, but you can layer it on as well. So I have the shade Amber. This is my favorite. And then I'll also be putting the other shades I got in a giveaway. This is the darkest shade I think in the line. This is called Soft Revenge, and this is unused, so you can kind of see the natural texture that the product comes in. I think it's a really unique, almost like baked formula, but it's not super dry as most baked formulas are. Formula works a little bit less well for their highlighters in my opinion, which was disappointing because I thought this was going to be like one of my new favorite formulas. Seemed kind of like Amrezy vibes to me. So I have the shade Amnesia, and this is a really pretty like kind of gold glazy highlighter. Looks lovely. It's a very like soft and finely milled formula, so I don't think it looks super unnatural in the cheekbones. The only thing is I think it just looks a tiny bit dry, which I wasn't expecting. Something about it, I just felt like it didn't really melt into my skin the way that I wanted it to and just sat on top instead. Especially because of the name Skin Glazing and like Glass Skin Finish Glow Powder. I was expecting a lot, and this just, I don't know, did not overwhelm me. It just kind of whelmed. I actually did kind of like the blush ones though. So this is the shade Lola. It's kind of like a berry tone shade. I also have the shade Adults Only. Okay.
Okay.
I think these are really nice metallic blushes. Definitely fairly glowy, so if you want a more subtle metallic-ish blush, I wouldn't recommend going for these. The only thing is most blushes with a kind of shimmer running through them are a little bit harder to blend than matte blushes, but that's not just this particular formula, that's anything. Of the cheek products, the only thing that really gets my stamp of approval would be the bronzers. Unfortunately, I was expecting a lot of the highlighters and it just did not give me everything I wanted. Lip products, which I'm very picky about, so I was really interested in trying out their formulas. Packaging wise, Jesus. These are the Dreamy liquid lipsticks. So I have two shades here, the rest are in the giveaways. Eve is the kind of nudie peachy shade that I'm wearing on my lips right now. Mood for Love is really beautiful. Kind of reminds me of Kylie Cosmetics Kristen, but these are really interesting. They're a liquid lipstick, but they're not super matte or dry. They have a little bit of like a traditional cream lipstick formula, but they have like the pigmentation of a liquid lipstick, and I think that these colors are beautiful. I find these to be really comfortable. I did add on a gloss on top, but that's just because I like adding glosses on. Usually I add glosses on to make something more comfortable, but these I didn't feel like I needed anything on top to make it more comfortable. So I really like these lipsticks. My personal favorite shade is of course Mood for Love. This is just such a beautiful berry tone shade, but the real star for me are their glosses. So these are the Shine Theory lip glosses, and they have quite a few different shades, some more glittery than others. So the shade I've been using pretty frequently is Renaissance, but the shade here called Stardust Radio is like a glittery red gloss. Packaging, as always, beautiful. They have kind of like gold flakes in the lid, and then this is one of my favorite types of gloss applicators. It's a doe foot, but it's kind of like flat-footed, slightly shimmery shade, but it's not glittery or chunky. I'm wearing a pretty thin coat right now. This can get sticky if you layer on a very thick amount, so I think that would only be a problem if you're using one of the more colorful shades as your only lip color. If you're putting it on top of a lipstick, you don't need that much to get a glossy finish, but if you're just using it as your lip color, it could get kind of sticky if you're using a lot. Either way, I was pleasantly surprised with the lip products. I think these are beautiful. And the more colorful shades don't stain too much either. Just a few more things. I'm pretty picky with my brushes, honestly, but not in a way where it's like I'll only use expensive brushes. I actually don't like spending a lot of money on brushes. So the way that I'm picky is like a brush that's expensive needs to be really good in order for me to be like, okay, that's worth spending money on a brush. I gotta say, if you're wanting to spend a little bit more and invest in some good brushes, I think the Nabla ones are a great way to go. I have a few that I'm going to be putting into the giveaway, but these are my favorite shapes. This is the Bon Mine brush. I use this one for blush. It's just kind of like a flatter type brush with a little bit of point. I think this is really beautiful for doing powder blushes. It's just fluffy enough that you can blend out a more stiff formula, but I think it's just really beautiful for fitting all over your cheek like that. The highlighter brush is really good as well. This one has a pretty tapered end, and this type of brush is my favorite shape for applying highlighters. It reminds me a lot of my Morphe brush that I use for highlighter often, but if you don't want to buy a Morphe brush, this is good, and I think the hairs are better quality. Their eyeshadow brushes are also really, really good. So I have here the Soft Dab and Smudge, the Pointed Crease. I love smaller detail brushes like this, and I think this is perfect for getting the outer V. Precision Soft Crease, this I like to use to lay down my first transition shade, so I just use this one to kind of blend out that first kind of like mauve tone shade. And then the Lash Line Smudger, this I really like using for doing my shimmer shades on my lid. So those are my favorite brushes from the Nabla line. This next thing was a sneak attack favorite, definitely one of the most underrated products in their line. This is the Nabla Cupid's Arrow eyeliner. Arrow number 4, it's the blackest black shade I've ever seen in my life. And this I was not expecting to like. It's kind of like a thicker pencil, so I was like, I'm gonna hate that. That's like some Davina Selling Sunset type eyeliner. But it is the creamiest, like softest, glidey formula I've ever seen. Like, ugh. And this is my favorite pencil type eyeliner because I think that it blends so beautifully. So I'll just dab kind of tiny bit onto my outer corner and then use a brush to get the most beautiful, precise, kind of lightly blended flick. I don't put liner on my waterline. I think it makes my eyes look smaller. But if you're wanting something that's really, really creamy and very soft, I think this is beautiful. It's not painful. It's not like a stiff formula at all. But it's also like pretty much waterproof. So I feel like even though it's a really like soft, creamy formula, sometimes with those types of formulas you give up in terms of longevity, but this is the best of both worlds. Like, best pencil liner ever, and I'm not an eyeliner person. And then finishing off with the Major Pleasure mascara. This, for me, was just kind of meh. I do like the shape of the brush. It's kind of like a little bit curved and kind of fluffy, so that is my favorite type of like brush applicator for mascaras. I don't like the plasticky, spiky ones, but to be honest, I'm not going to splurge on a high-end mascara unless it's like the Pat McGrath one. This mascara for me, it gave me like okay length and volume, but it didn't last the best throughout the day. I did notice a little bit of smudging on my under eyes, which does happen with a lot of different mascara formulas, but I'm not going to be spending a ton of money on a mascara that does that if I could spend like $5 on one that doesn't. And I think that's pretty much all I had to review, so I hope you guys enjoyed the indie brand spotlight on Nabla today. Of what I've tried, I think there are so many different things I could recommend. I think that the Cutie Palettes are a really great place to start if you're wanting to try out the eyeshadow formula, or just go for one of the bigger palettes if you want versatility. I think the Secret palette is basically their version of the Jackie Aina palette. This Cupid's Arrow liner, just so good. I do be liking the bronzer a lot, and I think those are my top recommendations, but everything else in here is pretty good. I think that they don't make a ton of straight up bad products, they just make a few things that aren't for me, if that makes sense. Like, the glitters aren't bad glitters, but I ain't going to use these. So that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video, but I hope you guys enjoyed. And I can't do these indie brand spotlight videos all that often just because it takes a lot to do like a full brand review, but I will try and get another one in the works. I'm not sure which brand to do. I'm thinking maybe Kaleidos, but maybe something else. I don't know. Anyways, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Make sure you are subscribed down below. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And if you made it to the very end of this video, you get the bonus meme. I love you. Bye.
That dog like